Okay, good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We got a good group of people today. I think we're at 80 participants, so that's fantastic. Today we have the honor of having Elizabeth Long and Mary McDonald from LM Law Group. And they're going to talk a little bit about the immigration process and what to look out for as an international student. I won't take too much introducing them, so I'm going to pass it on to Elizabeth and Mary, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to come here. I think we've been coming here for, pre-pandemic, probably close to, who knows, almost a decade. Um,
Yes.
and it's always a pleasure to see you guys and go through, what you need to do in order to keep your status and get permanent residence. These days, there's been a lot of changes, and what we wanted to do, there's a lot of new things. I know some of you guys come several times, and we're so happy that you can. And this time, I think if you've come last time, you will see that there are more changes that have just happened. All right, so let's get started. All right, so the first thing we want to do is talk about temporary status. So let's just talk about keeping your status as a student. Now, the law is that you have to actively pursue your studies. Otherwise, you will lose your status 90 days after you don't actively pursue your studies. Okay. Now, there are two exceptions to the law, is to the rule about actively pursuing. Actively pursuing studies means, you're registered, enrolled as a student, you go to classes, you go to exams. But if you are not enrolled as a student, and you're on your scheduled breaks. Scheduled breaks are whatever is on the academic calendar. So if you're on a scheduled break, you're fine. Or if you have authorized leave is more personal to yourself. If you, for example, need to take a leave of absence from your studies, what you must do before you do so is go to the school and ask for permission to do so. Okay? You have to ask that they give you authorized leave. And if they do, they can give you authorized leave for up to 150 days or one semester. And if they give that to you, then that time is not counted as not actively pursuing studies. You're still actively pursuing your studies then. Okay. Now, working while you're studying. You can only work while you're a full-time student. So if you're on authorized leave, you cannot work at all because you're not a full-time student. And you can't work unless, even if you're a part-time student, unless it's in the last semester of your studies. Once you've completed your studies, you are no longer a student. And even if your study permit is still valid, you have to stop working as soon as you receive the first notification from the school that you have completed your studies. The only exception to the rule is if you have been accepted to another program and that other program is going to start within 150 days. So let's say you've completed your first program in April and you've already been accepted to another program in September. So then in that situation, you are able to work the summer in between as long as you have a valid study permit.
Okay, and while you're here studying, it's also very important to keep an eye on when your study permit is going to expire and to apply for an extension if you need one. So if your study permit's going to expire before you're going to finish your studies, you need to apply for a study permit extension before the expiry date. And this would go for future work permits that you might be on as well. If you apply for an extension before your current permit expires, and if you submit all the correct forms and you pay the correct fees, then you have what's called implied status, and you're allowed to keep studying until a decision is made on your extension application. Implied status does end if you leave Canada. So if you leave the country and you come back, you wouldn't be allowed to continue studying on that implied status. So you need to keep that in mind. And something that will come when you're applying for your postgrad work permit. So Elizabeth will go into that in a moment. But what happens is when you submit your postgrad work permit application, you get an authorization letter from IRCC. It's an automatic letter that basically acknowledges that you've made an application for a work permit. And it'll say that you can work, it gives you authorization to work until a decision is made because you're on implied status. And it will give you a date on that letter. So it will say you can keep working until July 6th, 2025, or something like that. Usually it's about 6 months in the future. That date is actually completely arbitrary. You are allowed to keep working until a decision is made on the permit, even if it's past the date on that letter. We get a lot of confusion about this. IRCC sends out very confusing emails about it every now and then. There's just, it's a very confusing area, but to be clear, you can continue working until a decision is made. And we have a link on the slide here, which we'll be sending out, where you can kind of see more information. It's also something that you can share with future employers if you're having difficulty with them accepting your authorization to work while you're on implied status.
And I just wanted to say, everyone who has registered for this, we're going to be putting you guys onto our list where we send out news about immigration. I'm just in the midst of drafting a email to you guys talking about this whole thing about the WPEXT letter. You might find that useful not only for yourself, but you can also forward it to your employers because we get a lot of questions about this for because it's just so confusing for everyone, the way that the letter is worded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then finally, there's also something that you need to keep in mind, which is the restoration of status. So if you find that you have missed the expiry date on your study permit, for example, you might still be within what's called the restoration period of 90 days. So if say your study permit expires and you need to actually apply for an extension or you need to extend your status in some way. If it's within 90 days of the expiry, you can apply to restore your status. And you do have to wait until a decision is made on the restoration application to be allowed to study again. But that 90-day deadline is very, very strict. So you want to keep that in mind. This also applies, say you apply to extend your status as a student, and then you receive a refusal on that for whatever reason. The 90-day restoration timeline starts as of the day you receive the refusal. So you have 90 days from that refusal to try and restore your status. If, though, you apply for an extension and say you miss the forms that you need to submit or you don't pay the proper fees, what they can do is return your application as incomplete. And if they return your application, it's not the same as a refusal, and it means your restoration deadline actually starts on the day of the expiry of your study permit. So you want to keep that in mind when you're applying for these extensions. And if you are within the 90-day period, you can apply for restoration. Okay, and then IRCC has also recently changed the rules for applying for study permit extensions, especially in the context of changing your program, how you'll qualify for your postgrad work permit in the end. So I'm just going to go through those now. So the first one, so it used to be that if you needed to change your school, you could just apply for a study permit extension if you needed it, and then just inform IRCC that you're studying at a new school or a designated learning institution. And the short form for that is DLI, which is what we have on the slide there. But it's actually a lot more restrictive now. So if you're finishing one program at your DLI and then you're planning to start another program at the same DLI, then as long as your study permit is valid, you can continue studying on the same permit as long as you're attending the same school. But if you're planning on changing your designated learning institution, then you do need to apply for a new study permit, and you need to wait until that study permit is approved to be allowed to start studying at the new school. So there are a few exceptions there. For example, if your previous DLI lost its designation, if it was suspended or the program closed, then you don't have to wait for the new study permit to be issued. But if you don't fall into those exceptions, then you actually have to wait until your new study permit is issued, and it has to be approved before you can start studying at the new school. IRCC has also included the provincial attestation letter or the PAL requirement. So when do you need a PAL? You need a PAL if you're applying for a new program at a different DLI. So the new PAL would need to be submitted with your new study permit application. And you also need a new PAL if you're studying at the same school, but changing your level of study and if your initial study permit is expiring. So in that scenario, you need to extend your study permit and also present a new PAL. There are also many exceptions to who needs a PAL, so do check those out on the website and keep updated on those because they can change from time to time. And then finally, there's also now the field of study requirement. So this is for non-degree program graduates to qualify for a post-grad work permit. If you applied for your study permit after November 1st, 2024, so if that's for a second program, or maybe you've applied for it after November 1st of last year, and the program is not a degree program, then the field of study requirement will apply in order for you to qualify for a post-grad work permit. So you have to meet the eligibility requirements on the post-grad work permit website, where they list out the different field of studies that they accept for you to qualify for a post-grad work permit.
So, guys, by the way, how we normally do things is we have your presentations now. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. And we will try to get through as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Okay, so put them in the Q&A button there. All right, so let's talk about the postgrad work permit. The postgrad work permit for most of you is probably one of the most important things that you can get from your studies in Canada, because that is the golden ticket to allow you to work in Canada, which is key to being able to get permanent residence afterwards. Now, you can only qualify for one post-grad work permit in your lifetime, okay? People often say, well, I can't extend my work permit, right? Or my post-grad work permit, you can only get one post. You can always extend a work permit if you qualify for a work permit, but you will only qualify for one post-grad work permit in your life. And you may or may not qualify for another work permit after this. Okay, so most of the time, the length of the postgrad work permit can be very important. For example, if you only get a 1-year postgrad work permit, that may not be enough, depending on your circumstances, for you to be able to qualify and get your permanent residence application. So now, for those who get masters, you can get 3-year work permit. For the non-masters, if you have a program between 8 months to 2 years, it's that length of the program. If you do a 1-year plus another 1-year program, you technically can get 3 years, except you have to pay attention now. The second program must meet the field of study requirement. If your first program, if you applied for your work permit before November 1st of last year, doesn't have to meet field of study. It just has to be from a public college like Mohawk. That's fine. But if you're going to do a second program now, you likely that second program will now need to meet the field of study in order for you to get the 3-year work permit. And we just talked about that. Distance education, very important. It should be less than 50% of the program for you. And very importantly, you have to have maintained full-time student status for every semester except the last semester. Okay. Sometimes I have students come to me and say, well, I'm not doing very well on some of these courses, so I decided to just drop them because I don't want them to see that on my transcript. That would be a very big problem if you want to apply for a postgrad work permit. If you drop too many courses and on your transcript, it shows that you're a part-time student. If that's the case, unless it's in the last semester, you're going to have an issue qualifying for the postgrad work permit. I would rather someone show that they had an F, you failed the course, and it still show up in your transcript, and then for you to take it off your transcript and drop the course. Because even if it says fail on your transcript, at least it shows that you're a full-time student and you're still eligible for the postgrad work permit. Okay, so the 2 exceptions to the full-time is last semester, like I said, and also if you take the entire semester off on authorized leave. Okay, so let's talk about when you need to apply for your postgrad work permit. Now, the IRCC website says you can apply for your postgrad work permit 180 days after you finish your studies. Technically, that is true, but it's not advisable for most of you, okay? Because most of you will want to work while waiting for your work permit, which right now probably takes around 4, 5, 6 months to be issued. If you apply after 90 days, you will lose your student status and you won't be able to work while waiting for your work permit. So my advice is for you to apply within 90 days of the completion of your studies, and also your study permit must still be valid at that time. If you apply within 90 days and your study permit is still valid, then you are then able to work while waiting for your work permit to be issued. So just wanted to quickly go through a timeline about when you can start working. So let's say you're writing your final exams. Okay, well, you're still an enrolled student at that time. You haven't finished your program yet. So can you work? Yes, you can. You're waiting for your results. Have you graduated? You don't know. Nobody knows. So you're still a full-time student. You can work then. Okay, now the school has notified you, either through a letter, either through your portal, either through email, your transcripts, whatever it is. Okay, and you can't say, well, I never checked my email or I never checked my portal. If they issue that through your portal, you have completed your program. Okay, at that point, you have to stop working. You're no longer allowed to work. Even if your study permit is still valid, not allowed to work anymore at that time. You can start working again if you submit your work permit application within 90 days of completing your program and if your study permit is still valid.
Okay. And IRCC has also made some changes recently about eligibility for spousal work permits. So it used to be that if you were studying in Canada, your spouse could get an open work permit to come accompany you and work while you study. But they've made changes to limit eligibility for spousal work permits for students now. So for students, the spouses of students can only qualify for a work permit if their spouse is studying in a master's program of at least 16 months duration or a PhD or in select professional programs. For workers, so for those of you who might be transitioning to a postgrad work permit this spring, for example, your spouse can only get an open spousal work permit if you have a job offer in a tier 0 or 1 occupation or in select tier 2 or 3 occupations. And your work permit will also need to be valid for at least 16 months when the application is submitted. There is an exception for those who are applying for a bridging open work permit here. So if you're transitioning to PR, your spouse can qualify for a work permit. And then you also need to be aware, so what happens if your spouse is already holding a work permit under the old rules? Like what can they do? Can they extend? So if you're a student, your spouse can apply to extend their work permit that was issued under the old rules for the same duration as your existing study permit. And for workers, a spouse can apply to extend their work permit to the period of the family member's existing work permit.
Let's now talk about permanent residence.
So one of the key things to understand, both for the work permits I was just mentioning, and then also for many of the PR programs we're going to go through, is the difference between high-skilled and low-skilled work. So high-skilled work and low-skilled work are defined by different national occupation codes, which are otherwise called NOCs. And those are 5-digit codes that define each job in Canada. And they're sorted into different tiers. So there are 6 tiers. Tier 0, 1, 2, and 3 are considered high skilled, and tier 4 and 5 are considered low skilled. The way that your job fits into these categories is based on the duties that you do, not the job title. So NOC codes, each one lists main duties that an applicant has, and your job everyday job duties need to match those duties that are listed on the website. Totally irrelevant. If your title says something completely different, that doesn't matter if that matches a certain NOC. It's what you actually do every single day. So do focus on your duties. Don't get caught up in the job title aspect of the NOC code. You also want to pay close attention to the mandatory employment requirements. So, for example, if you say that you are working as a nurse and it says that you need to have licensing as a nurse, or you need to have a bachelor's in nursing or something like that, and if you don't have those requirements, then you can't claim that NOC code. So you need to pay close attention to whether it says that something may be required, something is required, something is usually required. That language makes a big difference into whether you actually need to have that qualification or if it's just usually recommended to have that qualification to qualify for that NOC. The other thing that's important to know is that it's just really important to pay attention to your skill level. So as I said earlier, you need a tier 0, 1, or select 2 or 3 to qualify for a spousal work permit. And also high skilled jobs are really important for things like express entry, OYNP, and other programs that we're going to get into in a moment.
All right, speaking of which, let's talk about express entry. So express entry is probably the most well-known program in Canada. And it is something where if you can receive the invitation to apply, then it can be processed quite fast, usually under a year. But the question is, can you get selected? So here's how it works in a nutshell. First, you have to create an online profile. You get to create an online profile if you qualify under one of 3 categories: the Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, or Federal Skilled Trades class. Once you've created an online profile, you'll be in the express entry pool. But if you're in the express entry pool, does that mean that you have applied for permanent residence? No, it does not. Okay, it's not counted as having applied because if you put your profile in, you're just a candidate. You've told the immigration authorities that you are interested in applying and that you may qualify, but you have not applied yet. You can only apply after you receive the invitation to apply. So once you're in the pool, you'll get a series of points based on your background and if you have provincial nomination. And every week, 2 weeks or so, the federal government has a draw where they issue invitations to apply based on your score, based on how you qualified, and sometimes based on a category-based draw. So we're going to talk about that, all of that, okay? But it's only after you get that invitation to apply that you can actually apply for permanent residence. Okay, so let's quickly go through the different express entry programs. I'm not going to spend too much time on them because right now the government, especially in the last few years, have really not only invited applications for most, unless it's category-based draws, mostly it's Canadian Experience class. But for those people who might qualify under category-based draws, the Federal Skilled Worker might be of interest. So Federal Skilled Worker is for anyone in the world. The work experience does not have to be in Canada. It can be while you're a full-time student. It can be self-employed work. And the work experience, 1 year of high-skilled full-time work experience in one occupation. Okay, then we look at a whole addition of your other factors and see if you have financial savings, and you need to meet the minimum federal skilled worker score, not the express entry score, federal skilled worker score, in order to get into the pool. But in the last few years, the government hasn't been that interested in the general draws, at least, in inviting anyone but the Canadian Experience class. Canadian Experience class, you need to have the work experience, and that work experience is very different from the Federal Skilled Worker class that I just described. The work experience you need to have in order to qualify for the Canadian Experience class is 1 year of high-skilled work experience in 1 year of high-skilled work experience when you are not a full-time student in Canada, and it's when you are employed as an employee with a Canadian-based company. Okay, this employment is something where you would get a payroll, where you have your income tax deducted from it. You get a T4 at the end. Okay, it's not something where you get paid under the table or you paid in cash and you go and make your own deductions. Those kind of situations, they often interpret that as being a contractor. Okay, what's the big difference between a contractor and an employee? It's not whether you have a contract or not. Everybody has a contract, or you should have an employment contract if you're an employee. A contractor is someone who is basically running their own business. You're self-employed. So let's say I'm hiring someone to paint my house. Okay, they say how much? I say okay. We agree on, let's say, $2,000 to paint my house. Okay, great. I give them at the end $2,000. I don't deduct from their $2,000 employee benefits or CPP/EI or income tax, okay? Because they're not my employee. They're bringing their own tools and they're contracting me for service. That's the difference. So you want to make sure that you're an employee, that your employment is properly documented in order to qualify for this, okay? So when you're high-skilled work experience, Mary already went through that, does not have to be continuous. It does not have to be in one occupation or with the same employer. But it does have to be within 3 years of application. Okay. The skilled trades I'm not going to go into, they haven't drawn that in several years. Okay, so let's say you can get into the pool. How does your score how does it build? How do you get your score? Okay, so first thing, age. Age is something you can't change. But as you get older, in your 30s and 40s, every year it's your birthday, it's not a happy birthday. Okay? In your 30s, it goes down -5, -6 points. In your 40s, it goes down -10, -11 points. There's not a lot you can do except you don't want to wait until your birthday comes. If you can put yourself in there early, do it. Okay? Next thing is education. Now, if you have a 3-year education program and then you have another education program on top, and you could have, for example, a bachelor's degree in back home, and then you have your Mohawk program over here, that really makes your points jump. Okay. Language points are very, very important. Right now, if you don't have a language score of at least CLB 9s, IELTS would be 7s in reading, writing, speaking, 8 in listening, or CELPIP is 9s across. If you're missing even just one score, that could make a huge difference in your ability to get an invitation to apply. Relevant Canadian work experience. That's the same work experience I talked about for the Canadian experience class, except we can count work experience, Canadian work experience, for up to 10 years. Yes, up to 10 years for this work experience. Foreign work experience. Work experience that you received outside of Canada that's high skilled could be counted as well. Now, oftentimes, when you apply for your study permit, you may not list everything. Sometimes people are advised not to. So this could be an issue with regard to misrepresentation. If that's the situation, do come to us, and we can certainly talk about how to deal with that. Okay. If you have a spouse, the spouse's education, language, Canadian work experience could add or take away. Provincial nominee programs. Mary's going to talk about that. Now, with certain express entry linked provincial nominee programs, you can have 600 points added to your score, which basically assures that you're going to be invited to apply. But it's only the express entry linked provincial nominee programs that gives you the 600 points. Not every provincial nomination gives you the 600 points. Okay. Previous study in Canada, if you studied in 1 or 2 years at Mohawk, you get a 15 points. 3 years or more, you get 30 points. Arranged employment. Now, this is we're not sure about this, okay? So right now, with a postgrad work permit, you don't get arranged employment. You can only get arranged employment if you have an LMIA or an employer-specific work permit. Now, back just before Christmas, the immigration minister announced that they were going to suspend the use of arranged employment points in the spring of this year. We don't know if this is still going to happen because likely the elections are going to happen very soon, and the minister himself might not even have a job afterwards. So we don't know if this is going to happen. Right now, we still have arranged employment points. If you have a sibling who is a Canadian permanent resident in Canada, you get a few points. Fluency in French is very important, but it's only up to a certain level, the CLB 7s, that you can actually get significant points for French, for reading, writing, speaking, and listening. There's also another Francophone work permit that if you reach this CLB 5 for speaking and listening or only, that you can get a work permit, which is an employer-specific work permit, if you have a job outside of Quebec. And trade certifications, these are more for the trades, the construction, mechanical trades. Okay, so we have just had an update on the category-based draws. I think it was last week. And what category-based draws are, if you have basically it's either French proficiency, where you have CLB 7s in every single category, or if you have 6 months of work experience in the last 3 years in one of the selected occupations. The government will sometimes have a draw only for, let's say, if they have a French language, they'll only draw for people in that in that category. Or if they're doing a healthcare occupation draw, they only invite people who have that work experience to apply. Because your pool, when they do these category-based draws, is much smaller, the number for the invitation, the score is usually much lower than the general draws. Okay. So what the government did last week is they made some changes to what the categories are. French language healthcare is still there. Now the STEM occupations, they took out IT occupations. They added insurance agents. Not sure why they added insurance agents, but that's for STEM. Trade occupations, they added cooks for trades. They took out transport occupations. So before truck drivers, you could get invited. Now they took that out altogether. Agriculture, agri-food occupation, they took out almost everything except the only one that's there is butchers are there. And finally, they added education, which means teachers and ECE assistants were added as well. Okay.
Okay, so as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, there are ways that you can get increased points to your Express Entry CRS score through the provincial nominee programs. And these are through what are called Express Entry linked streams. So there's several types of different streams in OINP. And as Elizabeth said, there's some that give you these 600 points, some do not. Let's go through the ones that give you the 600 extra points first. So for these ones, to qualify for these programs, you have to firstly be in the Express Entry pool. And then while you're waiting in the pool, if Ontario decides to give you an invitation, they can send you what's called a notification of interest. Then you send all of your documents to Ontario. If they approve your application, then they can choose to give you those 600 extra points into your CRS score on your Express Entry profile. So who are they going to be giving these invitations out to? So there are 3 general categories that they've identified. The first one is called the Human Capital Priority Stream. So in order to receive a notification of interest in this stream, you have to be in the Express Entry pool. You need to have a bachelor's degree, which can be from outside of Canada. And you need to fall within one of the special categories that they're interested in drawing. So in the past, that included people in tech, in healthcare, sometimes it's people with job offers in certain occupations. It's very broad. But basically, if you're in the pool for Express Entry and Ontario says they're interested in you, they could give you an invitation under the Human Capital Stream if you meet those criteria that they lay out. The next one is for French-speaking people. So this one, you need to have a CLB level of 7 in French and 6 in English, and that has to show up on your Express Entry profile. And you do also need to have a bachelor's degree. And again, that can be from outside of Canada as well in order to get a notification of interest through that stream. And then there's also another one, which is for people in the skilled trades. So if you're in the Express Entry pool and you have at least 1 year of work experience in Ontario within the last 2 years, in one of the trades that Ontario has specified, then you could receive a notification of interest. You don't need a bachelor's degree for that stream, but you do need to have a valid work permit and you need to have been working for 1 year in that skilled trade. So those were the streams that give you 600 extra points for your Express Entry score. These ones are not connected to Express Entry. They are in their own system called the Expression of Interest system. So for this system, you have to apply and make your profile with the OINP program directly, and that's called registering your expression of interest when you make your profile. What happens is there are several different pools, so you say which one you're applying for, you put yourself into the pool, you get a certain number of points, and then you're waiting for Ontario to do a draw that would include your number of points for your stream that you're in. When you get, you'll get what's called an invitation to apply, and then you give all of your documents to Ontario, then they give you a nomination, and then you're able to apply for PR through the federal stream. So it's not through Express Entry, it's through a totally different process. Ontario doesn't announce when they're going to do their draws, so it can be very unpredictable in terms of when you might get an invitation, which is why we always say, if you qualify for one of these programs, put yourself in right away. Don't wait around because they could do a draw tomorrow that could include you, and there's no guarantee that they'll do another one even that year that would include you. So it's very important to be proactive with these OINP streams. The points allocations are also helpful because they calculate them in a different way than they do for Express Entry. So sometimes people who, for example, are older and don't get extra points in Express Entry, they might have better scores in OINP compared to people in the Express Entry pool. So that's one of the benefits of OINP. And we can talk about the different types of expression of interest streams. So these streams, there are some that are called employer-based streams. So these are for people who meet certain requirements and have a job offer from an employer that also meets certain requirements. So for these employer-based streams, what you need is you need a job offer from a business that's going to support your application that has to have been in business in Ontario for 3 years. If the business is inside of the GTA, they have to show that their gross income for the last fiscal year was 1 million and that they have at least 5 full-time Canadian citizen or permanent resident employees. If it's outside of the GTA, then they have to show that they have 500,000 in income and 3 full-time Canadian citizens or permanent resident employees. The job offer itself has to be full-time and permanent. Permanent means no end date in your contract. Those are the main requirements for the employer. And then there are 3 different streams under these employer-based categories. So the first one is international student. So to qualify for international student, the international student stream, you need to have a job offer that is from an employer who meets those requirements that I just mentioned. You have to have completed your program of study in Ontario, and you need to apply within 2 years of graduating. You have to have completed, you have to have graduated from an eligible program, meaning you've either done a 2-year degree or diploma program in Ontario, or a 1-year college program that grants an Ontario graduate or Ontario College Graduate Certificate. Aside from qualifying education within the last 2 years, you need the high-skilled job offer that's full-time. You need to be paid at least the low wage for your occupation according to your location of employment. And for graduates of Mohawk College, you're going to have a benefit if you are going to be working, for example, in Hamilton, because you do get extra points based on your regionalization of where you've graduated and where your job offer is. So that's a big advantage about being at Mohawk. The next one is called skilled worker. So under the skilled worker stream, you need a job offer that meets the requirements that I mentioned above. And then you need 2 years of work experience in the same occupation as your job offer. That work experience doesn't have to have been inside of Canada. So it can have been outside of Ontario, it can be outside of Canada. It just has to show that you have that 2 years of experience within the last 5 years. It has to be a high-skilled job offer. And the salary has to meet the median wage for your region as defined on the Job Bank website. And there are no education requirements for the stream. So the main one here is the 2 years out of the last 5 years of work experience in the same occupation as your job offer. And then finally, there's the in-demand job stream. So OINP has a list of occupations that they're looking for this stream. So if you are working in one of the occupations that they've listed and you have a job offer that meets those requirements from an employer that meets those requirements, you could qualify. You need 9 months of work experience in Ontario in that same occupation, but it can be with a different employer than the person who's offering you the job. And you also need to make the median wage level for the occupation. So if you have a job offer in one of these areas, or you get 9 months of experience, or for example, if your spouse might meet those requirements, you want to look out and see maybe you can qualify for the in-demand stream.
All right, so we've just had an announcement in the last few weeks about the caregiver program. And the caregiver program, it's a very interesting program because many of you or your spouses who are here on work permits could qualify. So this program is going to open end of this month. And it's only open for those who are currently working full-time in Canada. You have to have a job offer to take care of children, elderly, or disabled people in their own home. Okay, it's not in an institution, in their own home. The employer, the government has opened it up to not only the family to hire you, but it could also be certain organizations or institutions that hire full-time workers to provide the home care. Now, the qualification is you either have 6 months of relevant or recent work experience, or 6 months of relevant caregiving training. Okay, so for example, let's say you did ECE training, for example, and you graduate and you have a job taking care of children in their home. That would be okay. You don't need the work experience. Or let's say your spouse has work experience taking care of someone elderly for at least 6 months. And they're working now and they have a job to take care of someone elderly in their home, then they could qualify. So this is a permanent residence application. And the only other 2 requirements is a high school diploma, and you have to pass your language exam of a 4, CLB 4 as well. Okay. All right, so we've talked a lot about all these kind of different programs, and it's been really fast. We've been talking really fast just to try to get this information to you. Now, what are some of the things that you should consider if you think your points are not high enough for express entry?
So the first thing you want to do is seek advice on how you might be able to raise your points. So things like common things that we see are, for example, if people raise or increase their work experience inside or outside of Canada. So for example, a lot of students will come work for a while in Canada, but sometimes it's actually really beneficial to get a year of work experience outside of Canada to raise your CRS points. So that's maybe something that could apply in your situation. The next would be increasing your language score. So these days, you really want to be scoring around CLB 9s, which is 7 in everything and 8 in listening on an IELTS, or 9s and above in everything on a CELPIP. that's where you really want to be on your language test if you're going to be competitive in express entry. So if you aren't scoring there, rewrite your language test. Keep trying until you do get those high scores if you can. Increasing your education. So sometimes that can make a really big difference in the skills transferability area. If you were to pursue further education, that you want to see if that would apply in your situation. Getting arranged employment, so an LMIA or another employer-specific work permit, as Elizabeth mentioned, it may or may not continue to be relevant for CRS points, but right now it certainly is. Getting work experience under the category-based draws. So as we saw, those are changing all the time. But if you do have the opportunity to get 6 months of work experience in one of the ones that's currently listed, that could be a great way to qualify for getting an express entry invitation to apply. Increasing French, so that's been a very big one over the last couple of years. You do get 50 extra points if you can get CLB7s on your French test. And they also do the category-based French draws, which Elizabeth was mentioning. So that can be a really, really good way to qualify for express entry draws. And qualifying under one of the P&P based programs. So as I mentioned, there's a couple programs that do give you 600 extra points on your express entry profile if you're able to get that invitation.
And then, express entry is not the end all and be all for permanent residence. There are other programs, and we can also certainly look at them. For example, the International Student Stream for the PMPs or any of the other PMP programs. There's the caregiver program, there are entrepreneur routes. There's different the RCIP program just came out, although the communities haven't published it yet. They should be publishing it in the next few weeks. And we'll certainly send out a notice about that, when they do, through the newsletter. So we'll register you guys all through that. There's the AIP. So there's a lot of different programs that we could consider for your situation and see if other things work.
Another important one is trying to keep in status. So as Elizabeth mentioned, so important to make sure that you get as long as you can on your post-grad work permit. Making sure that you have an option to extend your work permit at the end of your post-grad work permit, if possible, through an employer or a closed work permit option. And then teaming up with your spouse. So check out what your spouse's points might be under either OINP or one of the other programs that we've mentioned, or their express entry score. There might be a way that they could get PR and you can be an accompanying dependent on their application.
And finally, plan some more. I'm putting up a slide here about our contact information. We highly, highly recommend that you come for an individual consultation about your own situation. What we've offered today is not advice, it's information, general information. Some of it applies to you, some of it probably doesn't. Which route works best for you? That's something where we had to sit down with you, understand your situation, and provide you with an individual plan. When we give consultations, we normally try to do as many plans, plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, as many plans as we possibly can for you, because, as the laws change, sometimes one plan is not enough. Okay. Right now we have probably most people have 1 out of 10 chances of all the international students and international workers out there. 1 out of 10 people, if that, will be able to get permanent residence. And so it's not enough just to listen to your friends. What did they do? Your friends are in very different situations from you, a different climate, different laws. And your own circumstances are very different. Even though you think it's exactly the same as other people, I would say 99% it's not the same as other people. So make sure that you understand your own situation and plan. We always offer Mohawk students a discounted rate. It's only $100 we do it by, video conference. You don't have to come all the way to Toronto. We just have that consultation with you to go over your plan. All right, let's go through some questions. We don't have too much time, so I think we're just gonna pick some some ones that we think will apply generally to people. Mary, there's this question here. Co-op students, if someone is enrolled in a co-op but didn't find any co-op,
Hmm.
and it's been 90 days, they can't find a co-op. How do they keep in active status, actively study? Yeah.
Yes, that's very important to make sure that you do engage in studies within the 90 days. So if, for example, you're not finding a co-op, I would definitely, first of all, reach out to your school, make sure that you're getting support in terms of finding placements. It may be that you need to go back into classes for that semester and start pursuing studies again. Otherwise, you could lose your status. And if it's within the 90 days, you can apply to restore your status to student and apply to restore your co-op work permit as well. So you may need to submit a study permit extension just to show that you are still actively engaged in your studies and it doesn't go more than 90 days without actively pursuing your program.
You should also ask the school to give you authorized leave for
Mm.
that one semester. Keep in mind that if you're not a full-time student, you are not allowed to work at all. Okay. So just because you can't find a co-op doesn't mean that you can work. You can't unless you are a full-time student. So you may want to take some classes and then be a full-time student, or you could ask for authorized leave.
Okay. Say I were to work as an aircraft mechanic, how long do I work until I'm nominated for PR?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I don't know. It's like asking me how much is dinner when I don't know what your situation, when I don't know what you want. We need to take a look at your entire situation and then we can go over a plan for you. So do come and let us know. Okay. This person applied for an extension over 3 months ago, and their current study permit will expire soon. They haven't received any notice from the government. Can they continue to study after their current study permit expires?
So as long as you submitted your application properly with all the right fees and forms, you do have implied status and you can continue studying until a decision is made on your application. But if you leave Canada, for example, then you will lose your implied status and you won't be able to continue studying. Okay. For those that have applied for a study permit extension before November 24 are not affected by the new policy.
Yes, so if you applied for your study permit or study permit extension before I think it's, yeah,
November
November
1st,
1st,
2024.
2024, then you are under the old rules for the field of study. Um, Someone worked more than 24 hours a week off campus. Uh, what happens when they do that?
So in this situation, you would want to come talk to us and we can talk about the different options that you have. Generally, if you worked more than the authorized amount, that means you have worked without authorization. And there are questions about that on the postgrad work permit application form. And if you select yes to that, there are rules that say that officers can't give you a new work permit within 180 days of having worked without authorization. So can create problems. Do come and see us so we can talk about your situation.
And if you haven't yet and you're considering do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
It's definitely not worth jeopardizing your ability to get a work permit and stay in Canada.
Mhm. Okay. If somebody gets their study permit with the help of an immigration agency, do they need to use the same account to apply for their postgrad work permit, or can they open a new account?
So, you know, a lot of times when you hire someone, they may or may not be an authorized representative, no less a lawyer. But there's a lot of times people when they apply for you that they're not an authorized representative and they don't have a representative portal. When we submit applications for our clients, we submit it through our representative portal. But sometimes you get people who submit it under your name. They're not supposed to. They do it because they don't have a representative portal. They're actually not authorized to represent you. So you have to understand how it is that they actually submitted something for you. If they didn't submit something for you through, if they submit something through your own portal, they created a portal and just pretended to be you and submitted through you, then I'm not sure if you can create another portal or not, or if you have your GC key and you have to get the credentials to submit it through that. Um, International Student Stream. Can they, if someone applied for provincial nomination through International Student Stream, can they also apply through Express Entry as well?
So you can be in both pools at the same time. Definitely, you can have an expression of interest in the international student stream and an express entry profile. You can wait and see which one gives you an invitation first. You can't apply for PR twice. So if you apply for PR all the way through the international student stream and you get an invitation to apply through express entry, that can get more complicated. Yeah, they can't approve you for PR 2 times.
Yeah, you can only get one PR, but you can submit both applications as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So what can I do if I applied for my study permit extension in August, but I've not received it? I'm about to finish my second program. What happens to my postgrad work permit?
so if you apply for a study permit extension in August of last year and have not received it, that's a very, very long time that you haven't received it. Um, we'll have to take a look, and you should come and we can see how come you haven't received your study permit extension yet. But in general, if you have applied for a study permit extension and you haven't received it yet, when you apply for your postgrad work permit, you aren't technically allowed to work while waiting for the work permit like you normally can with a valid study permit. Once your new study permit is issued, you can start working, but until you can apply for your postgrad work permit, you just can't work until your new study permit is issued. Okay, I think it's 1 o'clock, so we're basically out of time. Um, Unfortunately, we have so many questions today. But what I would encourage you all to do is do come and see us and schedule a consultation. Just email us, and we can certainly try to have a talk with you about your own situation. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elizabeth and Mary. I really appreciate all the valuable information the students received today. And I know that this is recorded. And so our participants here today should expect an email with the video.
Yes, and we'll send out the slides to you all as well. So thank you guys all. It's not easy these days to do what you do, and we so appreciate for all your efforts and all your hard work in trying to do this and stay in this country. We certainly, there's a lot of talk about who we need in a country, and I firmly believe that people with your kind of hardworking and determination, I think truly, truly will make our country better. So thank you so much for coming. All the best, you guys.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Mary. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.
Here.
Okay.